So Kamala, the Kamala, the cop Harris. She was given a hard-hitting question and chose to deflect and give a hard-hitting answer. As we all know, there's military operations taking place in Rafah, a city home to 1.5 million Palestinians. There's nowhere left for them to run. Where can they go to? And what does Kamala, the Kamala Harris say? What does she say? What does she mention? Shrimps and grits. That's right, shrimps and grits, baby. Shrimps and MFing grits. Oh, yeah.
Madam Vice President, Hamas has accepted a ceasefire deal. Hamas has accepted a ceasefire deal. Your reaction?
What are your thoughts on Hamas accepting a ceasefire deal?
Woo! She girl bossed her way up out of that one. Shrimps and grits. Kamala Harris, 2024. One more time.
Madam Vice President, Hamas has accepted a ceasefire deal. Hamas has accepted a ceasefire deal. Your reaction?
What are your thoughts on Hamas accepting a ceasefire deal?
Now, as I covered in an earlier segment, Israel just gave that whole ceasefire deal the middle finger. However, the U.S. tells Israel it won't back Rafah operation as currently planned. Now, let's go ahead and listen to what John Kirby says. You bring shame to the word Kirby. How dare you besmirch that beautiful video game character, you bastard.
We've made clear our views about operations in Rafah that could potentially put more than 1 million innocent people at greater risk. During his call with Prime Minister Netanyahu, the president again made this clear. He also made clear that we continue to believe that the hostage deal is the best way to avoid that sort of an outcome while securing the release of those hostages. And as I said, those conversations continue.
Yes, those conversations continue, but will they go anywhere? The U.S. cannot support a full-scale attack on Rafah as it would lead to additional loss of life and disrupt humanitarian aid deliveries, and as the State Department said on Monday. Well, first of all, people at the State Department, you do realize that Israel is denying those food trucks to get in and out, right? You do realize that nothing can get in and out because Israel is deciding that. Plus, many of these food aid trucks, there have been videos on TikTok, Twitter, and other forms of social media in which, horrifyingly, you have Israeli citizens destroying food, ripping open the bags of flour and rice, throwing it on the ground. The comments by the State Department spokesman Matthew Miller came as Israeli jets began bombing the city on the border with Egypt, currently home to about 1.4 million Palestinians displaced from northern Gaza and central Gaza. They have nowhere to go. 80 to 90% of Gaza is a moonscape at this point, people. We do not support Israel launching a full-scale military operation in Rafah, Miller told reporters in Washington. Secretary of State Antony Blinken told Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and other officials in West Jerusalem last week that the U.S. could not support an attack on Rafah as it is currently envisioned, Miller added. What do you think they're going to do about it? Absolutely nothing. They're not going to lift a finger, folks. They're not going to do a damn thing. Israel did not present the U.S. with a humanitarian plan to the enclave. That is credible and that is implementable. The State Department spokesman said, we believe that a military operation in Rafah right now would dramatically increase the suffering of the Palestinian people. Miller pointed out that most of the humanitarian aid currently being delivered to Gaza comes through Rafah via Egypt, noting that an incursion into the city would make it incredibly difficult to sustain the increases of humanitarian assistance that we've been able to deliver. Earlier in the day, the Israeli Defense Forces told Rafah residents to evacuate because it was preparing to strike the city with extreme force. Airstrikes began several hours. Netanyahu has threatened to send troops into the city for several months, arguing that it was necessary to guarantee Israel a total victory. Follow the orders over Hamas. Last week, the Israeli Prime Minister said he intended to do so regardless of a ceasefire deal with the Palestinian group or international pressure. So this was always going to happen. If we thought the images were horrific and barbaric, hey, get ready for Rafah. We said that this was going to happen. We didn't want this to happen. Nobody wanted this to happen. But yet, here we are. We'll fight the monsters of Hamas and destroy them for good. Adding that no amount of pressure, no decision by any international forum will stop Israel from defending itself. Netanyahu declared war on Hamas on October after the Gaza-based group carried out a series of deadly raids into Israeli territory. Again, I think we should all focus on that article from the New York Times in which the intelligence services in Israel were given the heads up like, hey, guys, gals, there's going to be an attack happening. And what did they do? They sat on their hands and did nothing. But let's go back in time. Let's talk about why our politicians won't lift a finger. Let's talk about why they're not going to help. But we got to time travel. We're going to go way, way, way back in time before the internet even became the monster that we know it as it is today. We're going to go ahead and travel before social media was ever a thing. Let's talk about the influence of AIPAC and how Israel started controlling everything in Washington, D.C. Hey, Pat, take it away.
You've also said that Congress is...
Now, the volume is low, so I will not be interrupting as much, but there are subtitles here.
an Israeli-occupied territory. Now, what do you mean by that?
I said on the McLaughlin group in response to a question, Jim, they said, do you think that the Congress of the United States will resist this demand for further aid? I said, threw out a crack I'd heard. I said, no, the Congress of the United States is Israeli-occupied territory. What I meant by that is the most powerful lobby in Washington, which Congress can't stand up to, one of the most powerful, is certainly the pro-Israeli lobby. It has gotten its way in this town year in and year out. And I don't think the automatic votes of the Congress of the United States for $3 and $4 billion worth of aid.
Okay, so I will obviously be upping the volume on this clip. But what Pat Buchanan is saying is how Washington, D.C. has become now an enclave for Israel, and how there were politicians then that were delivering further aid to Israel because Israel was demanding it, and how Israel has been sending its lobby groups to more or less bribe and control these politicians through any means.
Israel are necessarily in the national interest of the United States, and that comment, which is to ridicule the subservience of the Congress of the United States, is perfectly valid. I do not believe my government should subsidize Israeli socialism, which we have done.
He goes on to say that the government should not be subsidizing Israeli socialism and that we shouldn't be funding it at all, period.
And I do not believe we should subsidize a policy on the West Bank of the Jordan River, which denies the Palestinian people rights which I support from Lithuania to Croatia. But if I also believe that...
Now, I thought there were more subtitles in this. I was wrong about that, so I apologize to all of you. But again, he goes on to furthermore say about how the whole system has not only failed, but on how both parties are now being controlled by lobby groups from Israel.
That Pat Buchanan is entitled to stand up and speak out against any kind of political lobby, whether it's the Greek lobby, Aid for Greece, or whether it's the pro-Israeli lobby, Aid for Israel, without being called vile names.
And you think that's what's happened to you?
Let me tell you something, Jim. When this little flap is 18 months old,
Well, just
I made this
Buckley's-
crack. I know Buckley's talking about an 18-month-old column. Let's forget that. When this broke, I made that wiseacre crack about the Amen Corner. It was wiseacre, and it was very funny. You know what happened as a consequence of that? People called my newspapers that carried my column and said, drop Buchanan. AIPAC listed 5 conservative columnists who were accepted.
The Jewish
the
lobby,
pro-Israeli lobby,
pro-Israeli lobby.
I went out to speak in the country, and a little girl from the junior league said, I get these horrible calls from New York about you.
And what he's going on to say there is how there are people who have been calling his newspaper saying that they need to drop Pat Buchanan. Drop him. Drop him quick, because he is bad, because he has been critical of Israel. Sounds shockingly familiar. Hey, Daily Wire, remember what you did to Candace Owens? Silencing her, censoring her. Notice how you have a whole lot of people who are just doing that click, copy, paste of censorship, 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 censorship. Yeah, we've seen this before. We've seen this story play out before. If you're not angry, you should be. And if you're not furious, you should be. But don't worry. Military operations are happening in Rafah. The Biden-Harris administration have given a strong worded statement to Netanyahu that he's just going to ignore. But Kamala has plenty of time to tell you shrimps and grits.